Hi, welcome everybody to the Sound Girls webinar on transitioning in the music industry. We have two special guests with us that want to share their stories with us. Savy Dunlevy and Laura, and I'm going to butcher this last name, Nagtegaal. Sorry.
It's close enough.
Close enough, sorry.
Yeah.
Savy is a wireless communication audio technician for broadcast television and live events. Savy is a newcomer to the world of audio, but they have worked in and been involved in entertainment since birth. What are you working on right now, Savy?
Right now I'm working on a little field project in Pittsburgh until November.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Laura has been touring for over 25 years as a guitar technician, tour manager, backline tech. And I love this about her bio. With her sunny and infectious demeanor, she spreads her newfound joy and youthful life force around. So welcome, both of you. Both of you have transitioned recently in the past couple of years, and we would love for you to share your stories with us. Does one of you want to go first, or do you want me to just pick?
Laura, would you like to start?
Oh, Laura froze.
Savy could also start.
Okay, Savy will start, and hopefully Laura will come back.
So I started my physical transition about 2 years ago, almost. And the process of realizing you're trans is a very long and tedious and emotionally draining one. So it didn't necessarily begin 2 years ago. It really began when I was born. So when you grow up and you're evaluating gender roles in your society, and being the oldest of 4 children, my 2 brothers, of course, were born and assigned male at birth, and I had a sister who was assigned female at birth. And I just grew up kind of resenting my brothers a little bit. I was jealous that they were boys. I was jealous that they could play certain sports and do certain things without the ridicule that I was getting when I would play baseball or, anything else that I was partaking in. When I grew up, I was made fun of for playing baseball with all the boys, and it just kind of seeded into this behavior that I would become recluse and, not participate in the things that I wanted to participate in because I was so keenly aware of my gender identity. And as I got older and, of course, go through the natural puberty that people who are assigned female at birth go through, it just became overwhelming, like how aware I was of my body not being aligned with my brain, and the clothes that I wanted to wear weren't the clothes that the other girls were wearing. So it was about 4 or 5 years ago when I was in the car with my sister and my mom, and we were having a conversation, and it was just super casual. My mom's like a girly girl, if you could say that, and loves to wear makeup, loves to wear dresses, like loves the whole feminine. She's just so into that. And I think I said something along the lines of like, do you enjoy that? Like, we were talking about wanting to wear makeup and dresses, and I just said, of course, I hate that. That is not, what I'm into. And she was like, why? It's so much fun. And I think I was like, I just assume that like all women who are women hate being women. Like, wouldn't we all rather be men? Aren't we all just jealous of like guys who get to go and do all these things, with the misogyny and the very, heteronormative actions of society? I was like, I wanted to be a dude for the longest time. So she said, I love being a girl. And that for me was mind blowing. I was like, I had no idea women felt that way, let alone, enjoyed getting done up, enjoyed like wearing pink and wearing skirts and all of these things. So that, was the pivotal moment, I think, for me to start exploring what my options were as far as being a part of the queer community. And it wasn't until I moved to New York 3 years ago where I started seeking out resources. I started going to support groups, and really finding like the trans community in New York, and then broadening my scope and being able to talk to people who were 60, 70 years old and just then starting their physical transition. And there was a moment in my brain where I said, I don't want to be married with children, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, and have this still be a recurring issue in my life. Or it's not even an issue. It's just like having this realization for the longest time and not only lying about it, but repressing it, and just allowing myself to live in a body that I know is not comfortable for me. So that began my process to seeking hormones and eventually getting top surgery. So all of these things kind of aligned into, I guess, my transitional story. And that's still ongoing. I find myself identifying with gender nonconformity because I feel like that fits me better. I feel like we're all encapsulating masculine and feminine like energies. And for me, I think because I embody both of those, because I'm very comfortable with my sensitive side and, my feminine side per se, I think, gender nonconformity is a title that works for me, just because, I don't want to subscribe to the gender roles I think that are so prevalent and really what held me back for so many years and what made me feel so excluded from things like sports, from things like, other masculine activities, I guess, that you could partake in. So all that to say, the past 2 years, I have felt more comfortable and more at home with myself than I ever have in my whole life. And I'm just really grateful that it has led me to opportunities like this to speak to other people and maybe, help them realize how they could be allies, or just the community that it's brought me, and, meeting people like Laura and, the dozens of other people who I've met who've supported me unconditionally.
Yeah, awesome. Laura, you want to share your story?
Yeah, let's hope the connection stays up now.
Yes.
Yeah, I missed half my own introduction. Yeah, well, my transition story was nowhere near as proactive and as deliberate as Savy's. It's 4 years yesterday or last Friday that I finally hatched. And I was somewhere between continents in a hotel room. I don't know which one anymore. And I had this talk to myself, you silly cow, you're a woman, accept it. And that was it. But my earliest active memories of knowing I was in the wrong body was when I was about 10. But I felt guilty towards life, towards the universe, for basically in the card game of life, wanting new cards. You just don't do that. You're supposed to be content and satisfied, or at least resigned in the cards you've been given, and that was my future. And I very reluctantly and phlegmatically and just lethargically accepted my fate. And okay, well, yeah, if this is it, then yeah, okay, I'll make do then. I think trying to uh, trying to pass as a man, trying to do the manly things. I think that's how I ended up in this industry, because this is like a very masculine, strong, macho, Marlboro Man, James Dean kind of lifestyle. Well, that's what men do, right? So here we go. But yeah, it just never really felt right. And I never really fought for myself. Maybe that's also what made me such a preferred crew member, because I was never there. I wouldn't fight for myself. I wouldn't say, yeah, well, but I need to eat. I'm just like, okay, yeah, anything else? Do you need me to do anything more? Because I just wouldn't say no. And at a certain point, I actively started applying that to just on stage. So in my private life, I didn't need to anymore. And that was, I think, about 2010, 12. That was pretty much the start of my transition, or like the prelude to my transition. And that's, yeah, now as my intro apparently said, something about being radiant and newfound joy. Yeah, that's me. People that know me from before, it's like there was no smile, no light shining on the inside, no one home. The lights weren't even on. And right now, I can't hide my smile. I see my reflection in a mirror or a shop window or anything. I stop and that's me now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super beautiful. That I think that's. I think before we go into other stuff, is there now? Do you have resources, or would you have advice for people that want to transition, that are working in this industry for mental health and people to talk to?
When it comes to resources, no, I don't have any, or at least none that I could, hey, go here, do this. I'm actually studying psychology right now to start doing counseling for other transgender people in general life and focus specifically on mental health on tour.
Right.
And of course, there will be an overlap transitioning on tour in what's more of a masculine, misogynistic environment than your normal daily life is. It's changing luckily, but it still is. But yeah, when it comes to specific resources, no, unfortunately not. I haven't found any, so I'll try to provide them.
Right. Savvy, what about you? Do you have
Greatest
any?
advice I could give is to seek out a personal therapist. That was helpful for me, just being able to unpack things and kind of having a sounding board, even like talking to the wall for, lack of better resource. Just because it gives someone who's affirming of your identity. There are actually 2 times that I came out before I ever, spoke a word about physically transitioning, and those 2 people were very opposed and not very affirming. So just having someone who's going to listen to you, who's going to be a sounding board to you, is extremely helpful. There is a network of trans musicians, particularly and majorly Black trans musicians, established by a person from France, started this record label, all trans people. It's excellent. It's called Transgenders with a Z. So seeking out them would be excellent. They're doing a lot of great things right now. But really, as I've been talking to some of my friends, the amount of resources there is for trans technicians, trans musicians, trans people is very limited. So again, with the therapy thing, I know in the US for certain physical transitioning needs, you do need to have a therapist note to sign off on. We're kind of being gate kept all the time by the medical field. So that's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. That goes for most countries. I know that certain states in the US and some countries worldwide are what they call informed consent. And where you call it gatekeeping, that used to be the norm until about 2013. But since then, because of new the new DSM, which is like the pretty much the psychologist's Bible, being issued in 2013, it changed into a kind of mental support group, one-on-one, instead of the gatekeeping. But yeah, pretty much anyone transitioning will be seeing a therapist unless they're completely DIY and have the ability to do it by informed consent.
Yeah.
But yeah, the therapist is that's literally our lifeline sometimes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Laura, this is a question for you. Because you were touring all of this time, and making the decision that you were going to transition. That had to be super scary, of deciding while you're on tour and how that was going to affect your career.
Actually, no.
No?
Short answer. No. The story behind that, I think, is more that night that I looked at the ceiling and had that talk with myself. I pretty much woke up next morning with self-respect, self-acceptance, self-worth, self-esteem, and over time self-love came. I literally went on tour a few days after I had that talk. I didn't out myself, but I was very actively busy with getting the new Empress's clothes on days off. But I was never worried about what will my colleagues think, because now that I had a self and had a straight back, I was like, take it or leave it. I'm here to stay anyway. You might oust me, I'll go somewhere else. Read between the lines, right? So no, I was never worried about it. There were a few bands that I knew in advance, but I had sort of been like first sub, second sub. I was just going to say, no, thank you, if they ever would ask me. And with two of them, I actually did. And there was no sweat of my back. But yeah, basically, take it or leave it. Laura's here. Laura is happy.
Right.
Laura takes up space. Your problem, if you have a problem with it, not mine. Goodbye.
I think that's great. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. I am very aware, though, that that is not the typical story. There's this quote from this book Aragon. I've not read it, but I've seen the quote, and I'm just paraphrasing it now because I don't have the quote present. But basically, you don't need courage if there's no fear. I didn't fear anything, so I didn't need to be courageous. I didn't need to be brave. I just did. But yeah, fear is, for most transgender people, and especially if they're also a person of color, yeah, it's basically the sign of their own death warrants. And luckily, I'm mostly white, so I still have a fair amount of privilege. But yeah, I left most of it by the door in the chemical waste bin, literally speaking. But yeah, no fear, no courage needed.
Right. That's great. Savy, did you feel similar to Laura? Or
to go off the point of courage, I really like that, because a lot of times people encourage trans people by saying they're brave, that, they're very courageous for coming out, they're very courageous for transitioning, when really for a lot of us, it's not really an option between being courageous and like seeking out those medical advancements for our own mental health. It's kind of a discussion internally of life or death. So for me, had I not had access, exactly, I mean, without the access to the things that I've had access to, therapy and doctors and all of these things, that I acknowledge my privilege by being able to access those, I probably wouldn't, my lifespan probably would not have been as long as I imagine it to be now. I couldn't even envision my life 10, 15 years from now, getting married, having children as a woman. It just did not make sense in my brain. And now I can see that. So glad you brought that up. But as far as the question was transitioning into industry, right? I think there were several discussions that went on in my brain when I was thinking about doing that. And for the most part, it was like the mysticism of like being in New York and having all of these resources and the access to a community that for the most part is very accepting and very, hip to the idea of calling someone a different name, calling someone by different pronouns. Like this stuff is not unusual to those people versus where I grew up, which is very, more conservative. The community is not as large here. Trans people are less accessible. My biggest concern about transitioning in New York was that I was working for a company at the time, and, to see the same people while I was transitioning was concerning to me versus being in a position where I'm freelancing and, this week I see someone and I'm going to work with them for a week and then we'll be done. I won't see them ever again. For the most part, I mean, the industry there, you see the same people repeated a lot on different shows. But anyway, the point still stands that like I was working with the same people. So I was worried that if I came out, first of all, what my position would be when working in these studios, would people get it? Would they care? Would they not care? Would they call me by my name? And to this day, I still go into certain, when I was still working there, I would go into certain places and they would still call me by like she, her pronouns. They wouldn't really get it, but it didn't bother me because at that point, they knew me as a person and I didn't feel like I had to come off a certain way to them. And because of my gender nonconformity, it wasn't a big deal for me to explain that my pronouns had changed. It wasn't a big deal that like, they weren't super hip to it. Like I just enjoyed working with them and they never cared that I looked any different. And despite it, maybe confusing them, it wasn't a big deal, which was great. My other concern was that, to that point, people would look at me differently. And, if they would think less of me for being trans and in fact, just being male and then assumed male by newer people that I'd worked with, or if I showed up on a gig and, I had not met any of those people before, to automatically be assumed that my pronouns were he, him, or to automatically be assumed that I was male, I would certainly get more, respect and more authority and less questions than I ever did as a woman. And although disturbing, especially with this show that I'm on right now, like kind of mentioned this prior in our discussions, but I showed up on the first day and I was, pretty low on the totem pole. And then the second day, another person on the production did not show up. And instead of assuming that like me being a woman, I couldn't fill that spot, they were like, oh, let's just get that guy to do it. Like, I'm sure he can, fill that spot easily. And it's weird because you want to believe the best in people and that if I was presenting the way I was like 3 years ago, that I would have had the same opportunity, but I really can't imagine that to be true just because of the misogyny I've seen, in my own life, which is disappointing, but it also made the decision to come out easier because I was like, oh, well, I'm stepping up into a role that people obviously are honoring. And I acknowledged that since I was young. Again, with the sensitivity to gender roles, I had noticed since childhood that men or boys in general, their jokes would get laughed at more. They would be better acknowledged in a classroom setting. They were more apt to being praised by, people in authority positions. They were more apt to be promoted. So just that, like, it's not an encouragement per se because I'm still gender nonconforming. I'm still not trans male. I'm still not male. It's confusing, really, is what it is, and it's disheartening. But.
Right. Yeah. For just to give everybody a little reference, we had a pre-Zoom meeting before this, and Savy was telling us how they had started on this production, and as they said, person didn't show up, and it's camera position, right, Savy? And Savy told us, and Laura and I both were like, that wouldn't have happened if you were a woman, both of us at the same time. And, you know, we don't know for sure if it wouldn't have happened, but that was our gut feeling. And most likely it wouldn't have happened, which is super sad. So that kind of leads into, you know, one of the questions that we wanted to talk about was that transgender people are in a unique position of seeing the differences and how sexism relates. There's plenty of articles and research and anecdotal evidence that, you know, people just, and we get it. I get emails all the time from people that have, either people of color or women that have, you know, have stated, I've changed my last name to sound white. And now people read my resume. I've made my name gender neutral, so they can't tell that I'm a woman, and my resume gets read. So, you know, part of the question was, have you guys found that to be true? And were you, I mean, I think we were all aware of the amount of sexism in not just our industry and society in general, but has it made it more clear of how blatant it actually is sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In the music industry, I haven't really noticed too much of it, but I was aware of it. But before, in my previous life, I was sort of casually aware of it, but I couldn't fight for myself, let alone fight for you.
Right.
Now, if I would notice anything like that, I would speak up. I just haven't been in a situation where I needed to. But in my other activity, disc golf, where I've been in a governing position or an actually executive position for most of my disc golf career, as soon as I transitioned from male to female, my opinion and the value of my opinion just poof, obliterated. It didn't exist. Before I was listened to, now all of a sudden, yeah, whatever. And it is so blatantly obvious. And yeah, would I have not transitioned knowing this? I still would have. I'll just take this as, okay, it's part of the deal. It's very unfortunate because it shouldn't have to be. Savvy, you should be hired for your skills, not
Right.
because you're a man or a woman or non-binary or whatever your color, whatever your hair color, whatever your should be the sum of your acts and your skill,
Right.
not your provenance in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, it is unfortunately part of the life we've built for ourselves. And I think that now we're sort of, with climate change, with racism, with sexism, uh, I'm probably already too old, considered like in a generational kind of sense. I think I'm Gen X, so I'm considered too old already, lost. But those who come after me, the 20 and the teens, they are the ones that can make the change for the better. And yeah, I'm hoping that there will be change for the better. It'll definitely take a whole generation. Like, just look at women's voting rights. In some countries, that's a few decades ago. Uh, it takes time, unfortunately, but yeah, we're making waves. We're making sure we heard. To quote John Lewis, we're making good trouble. But yeah, we need to be heard, and we need to make our voices heard so that tomorrow can possibly be better,
Right.
and all of us can make it better if
Yeah.
we just do our best.
Yeah. Savvy, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the level of accountability should not be subjected to only cisgender people or only men. I think, you know, whenever you see something going wrong, someone being made uncomfortable, jokes being made at other people's expense, especially on a job site, like those things should be called out and acknowledged. And just because you're in a group of marginalized people does not mean that, you know, they have full, you know, reign to say whatever they want. I mean, there are people I know that are in groups, you know, in groups amongst my own community that have said things that are completely out of pocket. So I think just, you know, the change does not come from, I guess I'm saying this, Laura, because it's not reserved to a certain age group. It's not reserved to a certain community of people. There are marginalized people who will marginalize other people. And I think at that point, we need to, and you know, part of what this webinar is about is being an ally to trans people. That's what we're talking about because that is our experience. But really, we should be an ally to everyone who has been subjected to, you know, terrible protocol in a work environment, in, you know, in a coffee shop, in, you know, wherever else you're spending your time. If you see someone being picked on, if you see someone being marginalized, if you see someone being bullied, I think because we have that keen awareness and because we have that, you know, almost sixth sense, really, just because we're so, it's happened to us so many times, the microaggressions, the sexism, the misogyny, the transphobia, the homophobia that, you know, I experienced as a lesbian, all of these things compiled, again, make us sensitive to that content. So, you know, just continue to call it out, and especially amongst your friends who trust you, and, you know, you want the best for them, of course. And the way they treat other people, I mean, my own family, again, having lots of conversations with them over the past few months about how their behavior is not acceptable, and, you know, how far to cut that person off or how far to let them go before you say something to them.
Yeah. Absolutely, and what I meant with the generational thing is not so much we're off the hook or we're lost cause, but revolution. Look at the last 50, 60 years. Who were the ones enforcing and enabling the revolution? The young people, the people that still have all the fire, that still have all the ideology, all the romanticism that comes with with being idealist. They are the ones that can bring forth the change. Greta Thunberg, had she been a 50-year-old woman, no one would have listened to her. Because she's 15 years old, the world listens. That's what I meant to say with it. I don't stay silent because I'm older. I just know that the younger people will actually bring forth the change. I can do whatever I can, but the younger ones will actually make the change for all of us.
Yeah. Well, you know, the younger generations at this point are much more accepting and open and just embracing of everything.
Absolutely.
Than, you know, of maybe our generation or an older, of where it's so ingrained in the generation above us that it's, you know, it takes a lot of work to change minds. And then there's so much ingrained in our generations that, you know, just pop up. You're just like, whoa, where'd that come from? You know? But, you know, our generation is at this point in places of hiring. And I think that's super important that, you know, some of the work we've been doing is, you know, of trying to get people that are in power in hiring positions to just commit to diversifying their crew or their workforce just a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, and so I think every generation has a part to play.
Yeah.
But it's slowly changing.
Yeah.
Slowly.
Yeah. And where change in one direction happens, the contrary reaction the other way happens as well.
Yeah.
And
And
there's a lot of polarization
yeah.
happening.
And I think
Switch on
that's
television and you see it, but the resulting motion will be towards the improvement.
mm-hmm.
But it comes with with tumbling, with falling, bumping your nose, sometimes two forward, one back, sometimes the other way around, but the net motion is in the right direction.
Yeah. You just got to keep it moving in that direction.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. That's why we're talking. That's why we
Yeah.
are speaking up.
Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Laura, after you know, this is going back to kind of, you know, of starting to deal with and realizing how much sexism there is. You know, I think a lot of women in our industry feel like they're never doing enough, that they have to be on their game 100% of the time, all the time. So I find that there are a lot of women that are very well versed in all aspects of audio. But I think that's something that women feel, is that they're just not good enough.
Yeah, it's what society keeps telling them.
And that's what society keeps telling, and the crew, you know, whoever you're working with keeps telling you. Have you found that to be the case now?
Absolutely. Before I transitioned, I had all my regular bands. Unfortunately, but also maybe because of, all of my regular bands went into the studio simultaneously, end of 2016. So summer of 2016, I knew one last tour, just do this for a second, and then I'm free. I can do this. The bands that I've been in contact since to try and fill job openings, and now I'm talking spring of 2019. Beforehand, if there was a job opening and I knew about it, I was either already asked and confirmed within 5 minutes, or recommended by a handful of people, confirmed within a few minutes, or I reached out to them and they said, "Oh, you're that guy," confirmed. Now, spring of 2019, a woman applying for a job in a patriarchal society, in a patriarchal environment, industry. Every single time I've had to submit my resume. I've never had to do that before, not even when I got shortlisted for A-band positions. Never ever done it. Now every single one. And maybe to my own detriment, because I play with my cards on the table, again, the cards reference, in my resume, I actually stated I'm a transgender woman because I wanted to avoid the situation where I end up on a tour like, oh, but you could have told us you're trans, we wouldn't have hired you. So I just wanted to have it out on the table beforehand. And literally with some bands, they were looking for a TM backliner starting early June in the Netherlands. This was 6 weeks before the tour start. Oh, thanks. Yeah, okay. We'll let you know. A week later, have you found someone already? No, we're still looking. Yeah, but we're trying to fill all the shows with one. I'm available for all the shows. You could take me. No, we're still looking. And that continued for 4 weeks. And then, hey, guys, did you find anyone yet? No. No, you really need to hurry up because next Monday, the first show is happening. Yeah, well, we've got that show covered, but we're still looking. I was available for every single show all the time. You know that, right? Yeah, but we're still looking. And that just continued and continued. And it wasn't until August of 2019, having had about 50 of these talks with a multitude of bands, where finally a band that I'd toured with before, but working for the support band whilst on tour with them, I got hired by them. And I asked them, so you know I'm transgender, right? Yeah, we know, but your resume is just too good. And yeah, as long as you tune the guitars right, we don't care if you wear a dress or shorts. So yeah, come and join us. But that was just pulling teeth. 1 in 50 usually was 6 out of 5. I would need to say no to bands more
Right.
often than not. And that's, yeah, so there is a change. I do need to work a lot harder. And yeah, it hurts. I understand it, but I also retroactively feel sorry for everybody, all the women, all the other marginalized people out there that didn't have the privilege that I had, white, male, that had to struggle for any of these BS ideas that people and concepts and conceptions that people have, because it should just be a matter of, is your character right? Do your skills match?
Right.
That's what it should just be. And now I'm acutely aware of it because I'm in it myself. And I feel sorry for not having thought and spoken up before. But I will from now on. Or since I've gotten acutely aware of it, I have been speaking up and I'm trying to do whatever I can to make this change.
Yeah.
And like you said, Carrie, you and I are pretty much in the hiring position instead of just accepting the job position. So yeah, I do try to be of influence there.
Yeah, it's super, that story is super depressing, and it's super depressing that I'm just thinking of all the people that are qualified to work,
Yeah.
and their resumes aren't even being looked at.
Yeah.
They're not even being considered. They've just
Yeah.
immediately been put in a pile of not even just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
First name Mohammed, then first name Janice, then
Yeah.
It's so depressing, but it's worth fighting for, and because it's depressing, we need to fight for it.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't have to be.
Yeah. Savvy, have you experienced a difference in your resume of job applications that you've noticed?
You mean like getting called back more often?
Yeah, like that, getting called at all?
I mean, well, the situation is, kind of odd just because we are dealing with the pandemic and
Right.
jobs in general have kind of come to a halt. So I haven't been looking for things quite to the capacity that I would be looking for if we weren't dealing with that. But definitely with this show that I was talking about prior that I'm on, I had known the person who was putting out the call for crew. So this person did know that I was trans and, acknowledged that, hired me on anyway. And I think like to the point of being socialized as a woman, having that experience of having to work 2 times as hard, 3 times as hard, feeling like you have to do something so out of line or so extra that someone will even acknowledge the work that you're doing, while you can see other people who are clearly not doing half the work that they're supposed to do.
Right.
So I think that already put me at an advantage, like having that background of having to do 2, 3, 4 times as much, and then now being viewed as a white male and being in that, situation where someone, wants to promote you. Someone wants to, do something really special for you, acknowledge all your accomplishments, wants to praise you consistently because you're doing so well. And they're like, oh my God, like, you're really going the extra mile. I've had guys before who wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. And like, again, people who are socialized as women generally have to do all of that work just to be in the room. So now that I'm doing all of that work and I'm in the room, it's like mind-blowing because it's getting acknowledged more often and it's getting praised more often, and people, are excited for that. And then sometimes it's like, well, if I just have to do the bare minimum now, or like do half the work, like, am I still going to be in the same place? But just dealing with the comments that have been made towards me when people know that or like assume that I'm male, or the misogynistic, jokes, or, just jokes that men will tell each other that are really weird and gross to me. Like, and just like sexually, like borderline assault, like the way dudes interact with each other. Right. Yeah. I shouldn't say that loosely. Like, the behavior is strange. So having to adapt to the new, like, social construct of being a guy and trying to get along with the people on the crew, but they're saying things that are strange. They're like, doing the baseball, like tap each other on the butt every time you do something good. Like, what is that about? So also just like shaking someone's hand. Like, men do really weird things when they greet each other. So you got to like master the like bro tap and then come in for the hug. Like, all of these really weird adaptations. I shouldn't say weird, but things that are new to me, that I'm having to adapt to. And people who do know I'm trans and like the fetish, I guess, being fetishized in a certain way. I've definitely had people, maybe outside of the work environment, but people I work with saying things that aren't entirely appropriate, asking what my sexual preferences are. Again, like tokenizing me because I'm trans, or like, being excited of the fact that I'm trans, or like making an acknowledgement that they don't care that I had trans in a way that's like kind of gross. So just like playing into all of those things and being part of male culture that I was never inundated with prior. And it's really weird. I don't know if Laura can attest to this either, but obviously being raised as a different gender and then later in life coming into that gender or coming into those gender roles and then realizing there's so much you don't know how to do. For example, my brother, knows how to cut his own hair, knows how to shave his own face, seek out a barber, knows how to ride a skateboard, like all of these things. And, to be fair, riding a skateboard is really not like a gendered thing, but I felt like, again, there were things I couldn't do or like was limited to because of my dysphoria that I didn't participate in. So now as an adult, as a 24-year-old, I am starting to do all of the things that people who are assigned male at birth, or people who were raised and socialized as male from a young age already knew how to do for 20 years. So it's really weird, like trying to play catch up on all of those things. But at the same time, it's like, I get to kind of be a child again, and I get to play basketball across the street without a shirt on, and like do all of these things that are very euphoria inducing that, I never would have imagined doing as a woman, or like, doing, I guess, in my adulthood. And
I do think that there is a lot of that, and maybe because of my involvement in sport and my involvement in helping organizations with their transgender policy for athletes in sport. You said skateboarding isn't gendered. I think I'd like to disagree with that. Not so much for the fact that women shouldn't skateboard, or men should, or whichever way you look at it. But you have siblings of each gender, right?
Yeah.
Your father with your brother, hey, dude, let's go play catch. With you? No. Of course, in my sport, I'm being accused of being a guy in a dress because I've got male advantage, because my male body, because my hips, because my muscle ratio, etc., etc., etc. All of that has been studied at length by the IUC, and testosterone depletion, the difference is gone, but the social construct of gender in sports, that is a thing. As a woman, throw a ball, you'll be doing something like this, right? As a man, you're doing something like this. You're being taught how to, by your father, by society, by your classmates. You're empowered to be athletic, to be a hunter, to be a gatherer, to be competitive, to be wanting to measure your dick against the others. Yeah, so yes, even sports are gendered, but not in the sense that you would think originally. But I'm so incredibly happy for you that now you do get to experience all of this and the freedom of just playing basketball topless. It's such a trivial thing, but it is so liberating. And you said euphoria. There's dysphoria. They are each other's opposites.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of the dysphoria will never go away, but now you experience the euphoria as well. And that's the best thing you can feel.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I think too, like, it should be acknowledged that if anyone has watched, is it Disclosure? What is the Netflix documentary that just came out? I think it's called Disclosure.
Yeah.
But kind of like questioning the way that trans people have been represented in the industry, in the entertainment industry for many, many years. And I think so often people assume that the trans experience is nothing but pain and heartache and, you know, suicidal thoughts and depression and all of these things that are just inherently negative, when, you know, in my case, over the last 2 years, I've felt the most excitement and, like, you know, exploration of this spectrum of identity than I've ever felt before. And in fact, it's a lot of euphoria. And having that realization and having that acknowledgement, having that, like, encouragement to explore that spectrum, I think is something that is not often in a storyline that you see with trans people in trans books, in trans movies, or, you know, I shouldn't say things that are made by trans people. I think they get it, but for the most part, as people are trying to represent trans people on screen, not only is there a lack of representation as far as, you know, the intersections of identities that there are, again, with non-binary, with POC, trans people who are all obviously very much part of the community, those things are not told as sweetly. So if we just want to take a second and say that absolutely there is so much pleasure to being a trans person, and to get to acknowledge, you know, or get to see the world in two very different lights is a privilege in and of itself. And, you know, maybe we are compensating for one or the other, like one is more praised over the other, or it's harder to come into womanhood or manhood, you know, vice versa, whatever you, or however you want to phrase that. I think the point still stands is that, you know, there is a lot that cisgender people, I think, could learn from trans people if we just started having those conversations and started representing them in a light that is, you know, positive.
Yeah. And this maybe ties back in with the Matrix, which few weeks, months ago, I don't know how many Mondays ago it's been because you know, the Rona. The Wachowski sisters admitted recently that The Matrix was actually intended as a transgender allegory. And now that you know it, you can't unsee it anymore. I never knew it. I'd seen the movie and I loved the psychological, the philosophical backstory of it, which they should have done more with, but okay, it's entertainment, so whatever. But when I took my first medicine, and here's a copy of it, you see the color? On my Instagram, I literally posted on day one, it's like, I always thought it was going to be red pill person, but okay, it is. And that's definitely something that we transgender people have above cisgender people. Like none of us are 100% male, none of us are 100% female, but for all of us, or most of us, that not quite 100% is like, yeah, it itches a little bit, but okay, well, what would it have been like if I had breasts? And just move on with our lives. Wouldn't it have been easier if I was a guy and move on with our lives? For us transgender people, that itch is impossible to ignore, and at a certain point we need to, but it also makes us acutely aware of the choice we do have. Not that it's a choice to transition, because that's basically gun to the head, it's life or death, but we have the choice to act on being authentic to ourselves, being true to ourselves, where the vast majority, and that's the Matrix reference again, most people are just gray mice asleep, just moving on like hamsters in a hamster wheel, and we actively decide to, like, I don't know what's out there, but I have to get out there. And yeah, that makes us in some ways, yeah, more aware and more conscious of our lives, because we actively choose life. And I don't wish upon anyone to transition, but I wish upon every single person to live their truth, whatever that may be. Give up that job that you had for 30 years that you actually hated. Be true to yourself, be authentic, live your truth. And for Savy and me, yeah, that happened to be give up the social constructs and the physicality of it that came with being born in the wrong body. In that sense, no more, no less. But yeah, it's, for most people, it's an incredibly alien concept. You did what? And they just cut it and they just don't talk about it. That's the alien thing in it. But yeah, it's just a technicality that we're getting rid of. Oh, there's a ground loop in the signal. Oh, ground loop in between fixed. No, no more, no less. But yeah, it's alien, it's big.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who feels so far removed from the LGBTQ plus experience should just take a second to acknowledge the ways that you have been othered in, you know, a society in general. And, you know, if you've ever done what Laura said, and, you know, what if I had breasts? What if I was a man? What if you know, just sat in that for like 5 minutes and then realized that so many other people have that question every day, 24/7. Like,
Yeah.
I think part of the issue with people not recognizing, or just the issue of things in general, is feeling like you're so far removed from an issue, feeling like you're so far removed from non-US issues, non-trans issues, like, or I guess trans issues and LGBTQ plus issues. It's just learning about them. like the people who are participating in this webinar who are not trans, but want to learn something about the trans experience, is already bringing you closer to an experience of being an ally in general. And when you start closing that gap, it becomes easier to not only hire us, not only, you know, acknowledge us and respect us and encourage us, but to just be a light to other people who do not know a trans person, or have never had this conversation, or have never, you know, felt like they could understand us. Because I think, you know, in everybody, there is a slight bit of understanding of what it's like to question your identity. And, you know, at the very base level, like that's what we've had to deal with, usually since birth, you know, sometimes from childhood, from teenagehood, from adulthood, you know, whenever a person decides to transition, if at all, or if they're closeted for safety reasons or whatever else reason, you know, just taking those moments to, again, acknowledge the other. Like that is, I think, the main thing, and that ties a lot of marginalized people together, and probably why LGBTQ plus people and women and, you know, just this group alone can relate so well to the issues that other people in the community are having.
Yeah, those, you guys, that was beautiful. Both of what you said, and I think it's really important for people to remember that and listen and understand that, and really maybe, like Savvy said, sit and think about, you know, all the social constructs that we're raised in, you know, and you know that the social constructs have, like, in my personal life, have been, you know, it took me till like I was like 27 or something to throw a baseball. I didn't want to go to ballet, but that's where my mom sent me. I wanted to play baseball, but I was just so conditioned. Girls don't play baseball. It took like a really good friend on tour got like, come on out and we'll throw a baseball. I'm like, I don't know how to throw a baseball. He's like, I'll show you.
Oh.
And it was so empowering to be able to be out and just doing something that I enjoyed, and not feeling like I wasn't capable of doing it. You know, he never said, oh, you throw like a girl. He's like, this is how you throw a baseball. It's like, wow, that's cool. You know?
That sounds awesome.
You know, so you know, it just, all those social constructs affect all of us on so many levels. And I don't think none of it's positive. I'll rephrase that. It can be positive, but it's not positive when you feel that you're stuck in this box, right? I think we kind of covered, one of the questions we had was what physical and mental impact of transitioning and how that affect the crew and performance.
Yeah.
Now that question doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
As I'm reading it.
Yeah, I came up with a question. And,
okay, this was your question. This was Laura. Laura had yeah. Do you want to go into that now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We might just as well. Most of us, or some of us, are touring crew. Basically, when you're on tour, to try and make it understandable for people that are not touring, I basically say we're a military squad on a submarine. We're on a mission. We come up for air in each venue and continue on. deadline, 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 and everything is lethal because power, because weight, everything. It has been mentioned in politics a few years ago that transgender people are a burden in the military because trauma, because costs, because physical issues, because mental issues. Yeah, how much of that is actually true? How much of it isn't? On the medical costs, of course, all that depends on what your insurance situation is. In my 4 years of transition, I have gone out of pocket for a rough estimate, $150 in 4 years' time. Everything else is covered by my insurance. So there's no financial burden, at least for me. For Savy in the US, it's most likely very different. Surgery, out of pocket. Hormones, out of pocket, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, there is a financial side to it. On the drama side of it, I don't know how it is for you, Savy, but for me, I was full of drama without showing it, because I just flatlined myself and cut every emotion else out of me. I was literally, if you would put me in a lineup with a zombie, a corpse, and a robot, you would not be able to clock me as the live one. You just wouldn't be able to. But in that drama-less shell that I was in, I was one big ball of drama. I just didn't show it. Now, being transgender, there's no drama. There's just sunshine. There's just active force, life, joy. And then, yeah, the physical side of it. I've been following I've been, how do I say that? In these last few days, I've been listening to the Sound Girls webinar and panel on how to be an ally for marginalized groups. And we are a marginalized group as well, obviously. But carrying weight has been mentioned quite a few times, and 50 pounds and more for the sheer size of the tours that I was usually on, where I was typically one of one or one of up to 10. We were usually outnumbering the stagehands. So I would just get on with it and get that 250-pound flight case with the 8x10 in it. I would just deadlift it on stage. I just get on with it. Since hormones and testosterone depletion, I've lost muscle mass. I've lost power, obviously. Now I struggle with my 50-pound flat case. And anything over 50 pounds shouldn't be lifted by one single person anyway. Health and safety and each other country's synonym for that. But yeah, there is a physical side to it. But to what extent is that an issue? It shouldn't have to be that I can't lift 200 pounds on my own anymore, because I should have never done it in the first place.
Right.
I just did because, well, no one was home anyway. I was just like, okay, I'm a robot. I'll do this. I'll do this.
Right.
But yeah, so there are certain physical aspects, and I'm sure that for you, Savy, it might be the same. You're probably too short to stack the old anti-4 bins, if you still remember what they look like. But you would have the power now since you're on testosterone. So yeah, there's also benefits. And if we were both on the same crew, we would just cancel each other out or complement each other for gains and losses.
That's true. And something I did learn and acknowledge as being socialized as a woman is to work smarter, not harder. And
Right.
oftentimes, like you said, you shouldn't be carrying 200 pounds of anything, let alone doing that by yourself. I mean, I remember having larger speaker cases, and because I am shorter, my arm width is also, you know, shorter than most average people's. So, you know, there were people that could take off the cases with ease, and I'd be sitting there like trying to find a way to maneuver it, and I just couldn't do it. So, you know, there are things that require 2-3 people, and there shouldn't be like any shame in that. And I think part of the problem is acknowledging that just in the industry in general, people are being overworked. I mean, my father spent a lifetime in the entertainment industry and, you know, is now not terribly old, but has a lot of physical issues and a lot of issues with his back, had to have his hips replaced, like all of these things that really, I don't want to say are ridiculous, but just like, you know, he could have received more help. He could have given himself more help. Like the amount of stress and the longevity that I think a lot of people experience in this industry is really disproportionate to, you know, other industries.
Yeah, yeah, and that comes with the gendering of that, because as a man you're just supposed to get on with it and don't be
Yeah.
you're just supposed to just do it. Way too heavy for you, do it anyway.
Right.
Because you don't want to be outed as something. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's hard, and that creates a toxic environment where you do indeed overwork yourself and kill yourself physically. Like about your father, you said, yeah, he's not old, but physically he is terribly old because he overused all of his muscle and all of his bones for way too long. For what?
Right.
Not be called a what?
It's a lot.
Yeah. It's very true. And, you know, we are in a position that we have a lot of people on tour and we have a lot of stagehands, but, you know, I just always learned how to work smarter, you know. I learned that gravity was my friend also, and how to manipulate that. But there's just, you know, I always tell people up until this year, well, both of the techs that I've toured with for really long periods of time are tall, skinny dudes. And they're not picking up 50 pounds over their head. They're just, you know, so everybody comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think crews need to, they should in general figure out how to work smarter and together, you know, and to, you know, and you're right. I mean, just standing on concrete all day. I mean, I'm ready for, you know, hip surgery, you know, it's brutal, you know. All right. Laura, this was your other.
Oh, the difficult one.
Yeah, your other. Laura brought up a really great point. I'm going to let her speak to it. But it's, you know, in general on sexuality in general, and how people react to it. And then we're adding, you know, we're talking about sexism, transphobia, and then we're adding other layers of homophobia onto all of these layers. And it's, I will let you speak to that.
Yeah. And another key word there, I think, is toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
It's there's so many layers to that onion to unpeel, but early on in my transition, when the bands or the disc golf colleagues that I've had that knew me as in my old shell and were trying to get used to the new me, too many times have I heard, oh, so you're a woman now, so you like men, right? Some of the men, well, you better not start flirting with me because all of those sentiments, and I understand where they come from because for the older generation, and that goes back to the psychology as well, and how psychology looked at it. Being transgender was basically seen as your latent homosexual person, especially if you transition from male to female. You were basically just trying to get with men, but a gay couple was strange, so you would just transition to female. But I've come across this in the music industry in the following scenario that I've come across once personally, but I could just hear the scenario playing in the head of the person about to hire me, or the band about to hire me. So if you could, and maybe it's more apparent to me because almost all of the bands I've worked with are rock or metal. And on one hand, they're completely open-minded, yet also incredibly conservative in certain viewpoints. So this band, 4 men, about to hire me, they find out I'm transgender. So if now they think that I'm a hot woman, ooh, if I like Laura and she's a hot woman, but she used to be a man, does it make me homosexual? If Laura, because they don't know my sexuality, and I'm actually lesbian, guys, so don't worry. They think, oh, if Laura comes on to me, does that make me homosexual? Both of those two scenarios leading to, we don't want that, we can't acknowledge that, we can't have that, we can't accept that, la 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 la. How do you fix that? Not hire Laura.
Right.
It's never been said out loud. I've experienced it once, very early on in my transition, but I just can't ignore the noise that I keep hearing that basically is this movie playing in these people's heads. You can hear the wheels clunking and rattling and the gears shifting. It's so bizarre that for their issue with homosexuality or the toxic masculinity that they can't quite address because they're men, they're not supposed to show their feminine or soft or sensitive side. All of the 3 words interchangeable. They'll just do this, la 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 la, and ignore it and move on, lest they confront themselves with possibly thinking about it. And it's, I don't know what else to say. I don't know if anyone can or could say anything to it. But yeah, I think this is a situation that, especially if you're a transgender woman in the music industry, you're going to have to deal with. I think that for you, Savy, it wouldn't be much, if any, of an issue, but I might be assuming there. But how does or would this work for you? And you've already said you're lesbian, so it's
Yeah. Well, I think just
that's a whole different level.
Well, yeah, I think like part of the thing too is not kind of straying from the binary of sexuality and gender and just all of these things. Like as I've begun to explore my excitement of like looking this way and feeling this way and already having like 20 years of pent up like tension about who I am and who I like and all of these things, dating and being comfortable with who you are is a completely different experience. As far as, you know, again, kind of going back to that point where I was being fetishized by coworkers, that, you know, is a different thing in and of itself. And I think like one of the biggest things is having other partners or other people who are attracted to you question their sexuality and then being the target of them questioning their sexuality, like that actually has nothing to do with me, and I don't care how you identify. And just because you're attracted to me, that doesn't, you know, if you still think you're straight, then fine, you know, whatever. I'm not going to figure that out for you. So kind of in the sense that like men, if they're attracted to me, you know, want to assume that they're still straight, but I'm clearly not a woman and I don't identify as a woman. And other women who are attracted to me are like, okay, well, am I queer now? Like, do I like, you know, everyone's just so confused by and again, that has nothing to do with me. Like, I date who I like to date, and usually I date people based on their personality and, you know, how I feel about them as a person, and not necessarily based on any other identifying factor. So how I'm looked at, you know, as a trans person, being the object of someone's like, you know, sexual tension or sexual gratification. First of all, that just shouldn't take place at work, period. But having that background and having that socialization, I mean, the way I combat that is just blowing it off as best as I can. I don't make the pleasure, I guess.
And the issue is in their head. The roadblock is in their head, but they make you the roadblock because you are obviously the trigger.
Right.
And
and like you said, they don't.
Not their problem.
They don't want to deal with it, so we just aren't going to hire you.
But
you know, and that you know, that happens to women just in general. Like, you know, managers sitting there going, oh, it's a woman, we're going to have to get another hotel room. Can she ride on the bus? What are we going to do? Separate showers? And then they built it up in their head that it's this big ordeal, and they're like, I'm not dealing with it, moving on. Right?
Exactly the same thing,
So
when women are hardly the issue, it's the people who kind of prey on the others in the group that are the issue. When really, you know, with my experience as being socialized as a woman, I would have no problem sharing a room or sharing a shower, sharing house with cis males. It's the predatory behavior that goes on is what the problem is.
That is the problem. I've spent my year when I started out. I had my shared rooms. I was the only woman on tour, so I always shared with guys. And I didn't have a problem. They didn't have a problem. No one was predatory, thank goodness. But that's what I would have had the issue with. It's not rooming with a man, but I would have a problem rooming with a man that was predator, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a super important. Like, let's actually identify the problem. What exactly is the problem? Because it's not just women in general, right?
It's
and
entitlement.
No one should care about
the predatory behavior. And that's false behavior. It's not a genetic thing. It's not biological. It's taught behavior.
It's
You're a woman. You're weak. You're a man. Go hunt.
It's taught, and that's part of that toxic masculinity that, you know, I don't think our industry talks enough about it in the touring realm of people kind of brush it off of just, oh yeah, well that's a hostile, aggressive tour, don't want to be on it. Or yeah, it's just guys talking locker room talk. But I know plenty of guys that don't want to be in those situations either. You know, and they just kind of keep their head down on tour, try to ignore it. But, you know, they're just like, not cool.
What do you call it? Tacit compliance? I don't know.
Compliant. It's, what would the word be?
You're an accomplice.
Yeah, well, yeah, then you become an accomplice,
Just by try
just
not
by
to
being,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, it should be, everybody should be able to speak up and just,
Everybody should be able to speak up and feel safe in their work environment.
yeah,
And, you know,
yeah.
I think all
It's only work.
it is work.
Yeah, but it's
And,
also
you know, and when
work.
we got to get on a tour bus to eat, that's
Yeah.
our home. And everybody should feel safe in their home,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think that, you know, with this conversation, we also need to have a conversation about just horrible work environments. And no one wants to work in them. And, you know, and I don't know why the industry thinks it's acceptable to just, you know, because we hear the same thing, just man up. You're going to have to toughen up. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, who made it that way? Right?
Why can't it be
Who
this?
said?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
The media was made. The media propagates it. We
Yeah.
live out the media dream.
Right.
We as men live the, oh, I need to be James Dean. I need to be Lemmy. I need to be. We
Yeah.
all, as a male in this industry, be it film or music or theater, it's almost expected of you.
Yeah.
Not anymore, luckily. It's changing, but like, I didn't tour in the 80s. You possibly did, Carrie.
I was at the tail end of the 80s, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but
there was some bad
the
behavior
sex,
going
drugs,
on.
and rock and roll was still very
Yeah.
much it. Some of my first tours I did with bands that started in the early 80s, some of the Bay Area ones. I got a few cracks of the whip by being exposed to that 80s mentality in the
Right.
2000s. It's horrible. It's
Yeah.
so demeaning, so degrading, so
Yeah.
toxic, and so
Yeah.
absolutely pointless because it
Yeah.
doesn't actually go anywhere. It's a it's the
Yeah.
Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. 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 That needs to keep evolving. At least it's, for the most part, it's not the 80s anymore, thank goodness. But you still see it sometimes, and it's
Yeah,
shocking. It's
yeah,
shocking when I see it.
yeah. But now, luckily, it's more and more they're the outliers.
Yeah,
It used to be the norm.
I think so.
So change is happening. We are the change. It
Just
is
gotta
going to
keep,
be better tomorrow,
yeah,
but yeah,
just gotta keep going.
yeah.
um, all right. Well, I think those were the questions that we had prepared, right? Did I miss anything, guys?
I think those were the ones we had on paper ourselves from our pre-meeting.
That what was that, Laura? Sorry.
I think these were the ones that we
Yeah, I
wrote down
think
from our
so.
pre-meeting. Yeah.
So these were questions that were submitted by people that registered.
Yeah.
Um,
Carrie, a quick one in the meantime. Are you following the chat? Because
um,
not explicitly any questions, but
yeah, let me see.
there's people actually writing and
Oh,
some
yeah.
good things being said.
Well, let me ask this question, and maybe you
Yeah.
guys have an answer, and then I will scroll through this chat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. Someone had submitted a question about past credits.
Yeah.
And I tried to Google some information on that, but I didn't find anything. I don't know if either of you can speak to that.
I have past credits.
Have you attempted to get them?
No, On my own website, in my portfolio, on my credits page, I actually, all my credits as Laura, I just mark as credits.
Mm-hmm.
Any of them that are attributed to my dead name, I have an asterisk, credited as asterisk.
Right.
And it's, in a way, it's sad because now I look at an old CD and I never had any production, what do you call it? I never had any writing credits, but always crew and production credits. There's a few that I'm actually proud of, but if I would show them to people around me, oh yeah, old name, it's a bit sad. I'm not sad enough about it to try and ask people to call back all of the 10 million CDs that have my name on it and print them again and send them out again.
Right.
I'm not that important, I think.
Right.
Yeah, now part of me would like to have my own copies of, here's a page with Laura's name on it,
Right.
but it just isn't the case. But on where I did sort of whitewash my history is on this page that I call What Others Say. I've had quotes from musicians and other crew colleagues that were published in articles. And there was always my old name and he. Now it's Laura and she. So where I have full control, I will. For the rest, sad, but I'm not losing sleep over it. But
Right.
yeah, it would have been nicer if it could have been changed, but there's physically no way to imagine on one of Madonna's albums or Michael Jackson, 80 million copies sold worldwide.
Right.
I invite you to start calling all 87 million of them back and then printing them again. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So yeah, nice idea.
Yeah.
Savy, do you actually have any credits already?
Yes. So Savy is actually like a derivative of my birth name. So I've gone by Savy since second grade, which is extremely convenient.
Okay, yeah.
And as I was kind of coming to terms with my identity as a young child, when, you know, virtual chat rooms and, you know, games and stuff began to pop up, I kind of went by an alias. And since then, I have considered changing my name, considered having an alias, considered, you know, all of these other things. But just because I've established myself as Savy and it's relatively gender neutral, I've stuck with that name. So it is unfortunate. It would be nice if I had the option of doing that, but the legal fees and the extreme extenuating circumstances that like stand between a trans person changing their name is just like too great for me to, you know, to make that change, I guess.
Yeah.
The other issue though with Savy is that I often, people are often surprised to find out that either I'm white or that I am male or female, whichever I was presenting as at the time. So although it's like relatively ambiguous, there are other like insinuations behind having like a creative name, or people often will out me or assume that I've never lied about my birth name either. If someone asks me what Savy is from, I often tell them what my birth name was. And so that leads to a whole different conversation. So,
Right.
Yeah.
But again, something for cisgender people to recognize is that, I mean, maybe not even cisgender people who have been married, have gotten married and had to change their last name. It's extremely difficult to, go through the process of changing your name.
People in witness protection.
That too.
Yeah.
It's something that's very, very tangible for us, but we're not the only ones.
Right.
Yeah.
This is true. And Chris made a good point. Chris is my boss from New York, and made a good point that everyone misspells my name anyway. So really, the ambiguity continues. It's just always ambiguous.
Right.
I have considered changing my last name because of all the typos and the impossibility of pronouncing it anyway. But,
right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know who asked the question about credits. I mean, like for me, my credits, they don't pay anything, so it doesn't matter, wouldn't matter. Um, but I know, you know, for past credits that you're collecting money on, I know it becomes an issue, and you know, I would just, you would have to Google that, find a lawyer that specializes in that. Hopefully, maybe you have a
Yeah, yeah,
manager that can assist. I'm sure it's a long, complicated
yeah,
process. But
yeah. Indeed, if there's royalties connected to writing
yeah,
credits, then yeah, you need
yeah,
to prove that you are you.
yeah. So,
It's yeah, for me, it's the most tangible thing would be a plaque. If they
right.
misspelled but they misspelled my last name. Why should I even worry about my first name?
Right.
So
I have some of those plaques here
yeah,
too. Um, okay, the next question is, it says, how can we help without being the bad social justice lawyer? So I think that's kind of in a nutshell of how to be a good ally.
yeah.
Um, and do you guys have suggestions for that? I mean, we came up with the don't be an asshole in general.
Yeah,
Sign
yeah,
rule.
Is the golden rule. And you know, we just did 2 webinars on that. I think there was a lot of good advice given
yeah,
and pointed out of how everybody can change their work environments and start actively practicing being allies.
yeah.
But do you guys have advice of what you would want to see in an ally?
Oh, thank you. This is the only thing I wrote down for the whole conversation. I was like, I'm going to touch on this. Of course, the music industry. Oh, thank you. The music industry, or I guess the tech side of audio, is very gendered. Like XLR alone is often referred to, the pinouts on XLR is referred to as sex. So there's a male end and a female end, and that's just been like kind of the tail of, you know, it just encapsulates pretty much everything that we already know to be true. So I think taking gender away from a lot of the conversations that we have when we're talking to people, especially people we don't know. So when referring to XLR, when referring to even bathrooms, or like, you could say, like, if someone asks you where the bathroom is, instead of saying, oh, the men's bathroom is over there, and assuming that person is going to use the men's bathroom, say the bathroom with the urinals is over there and the bathroom without urinals is over there. If, you know, generally you're in a
Sitting,
space
standing. Yeah.
exactly that uses, you know, sexed bathrooms. Period products instead of saying feminine hygiene products. You know, using send and receive on an XLR. Those kinds of things, and just like not assuming what someone's pronouns are. If you introduce yourself with your pronouns, oftentimes the person who you're talking to will reciprocate. So if I were to introduce myself as Savy Dunlevy, I would say, my name is Savy, I go by they, them pronouns. Or sometimes if I'm in a space where I might not be super comfortable or that I feel is super cis normative, I will say my pronouns are they, he, or my pronouns are he, him. And that person will oftentimes reciprocate. So doing that alone can make you seem like an ally to whoever you're talking to, that you're a safe person to come to about what your pronouns are. And just, you know, when you're referring to someone on set or anywhere else, if you say that person in the green shirt instead of saying that girl in the green shirt or that guy in the green shirt, because you don't know how someone identifies until you have that discussion with them. And really, if you don't have a personal connection with them or don't have a personal relationship with them, you shouldn't be asking them that question anyway. It's not really any of your business. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, if you just in general, I find this to be helpful for anyone I'm talking to. If you don't know what you're talking about, if you don't have a good response, if you don't have anything great to say, and if someone doesn't want your advice, you could always just say, how can I be supporting you? So if someone comes to you with information and you're dumbfounded, you don't know what to say, you're confused, you don't know how to respond, if you just say, how can I support you right now? I mean, that means the world to someone. And then it takes away any, you know, situation where you feel like you have to overcompensate or you feel like you have to like mansplain yourself, or you feel like you have to talk over someone, or feel like you have to justify your knowledge on the situation. And I think that goes for a lot of things, you know, when talking to anyone who's going through a hard time, or talking to anyone who has, you know, disclosed some really personal information to you.
Those are great advice. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I had a few as well on my list. One of them, which is actually one of the holy mantras in the live music industry anyway, don't assume. It makes an ass out of you and me. Like Savy said, if you don't know, ask. If you don't know, don't just blurt out something. Don't, like, Savy is they them. Don't call Savy he. It might be not as bad as she, but ask. Yeah, so that's definitely my first thing. I have a few more. Yeah. Especially taking hints from the episodes that Carrie already referenced to, how to be an ally to any marginalized group. There's things like virtue signaling or social justice warrior. We don't need that. No one needs that. Mm-hmm. If you are doing something, do it because you actually believe in it, not because you think you need to speak up on behalf of someone who doesn't necessarily feel it's worth speaking up over. And instead, give us respect, give us acceptance. We know we're others. Don't other us. We don't need that.
Right.
We live other. And yeah, we all have some baggage. Our baggage just comes with a medical toolkit. But we're not so different from the others. There's one thing that I particularly am hot on. Don't hire me because I'm a transgender person. Hire me because of my skills, because of my character. I just happen to also be trans. Like we as trans people are so tokenized, just like right now, hiring a person of color, just out of tokenism, it's almost as bad as not hiring that person because of their color, because you're not actually changing anything. You're just doing short term, hey, yeah, but my neighbor is foreign as well, so I'm not a racist. That's tokenism. It doesn't change anything.
Right.
Yeah, we are transgender people, but that doesn't necessarily mean we bring drama. Like I said before, I think we're less drama because we've actually come to terms with the drama that was. Savy already touched on it. The pronouns. It's really good if you introduce yourself with your pronouns. I usually actually go with, what's your preferred name? Because regardless of the pronouns, your name is always the more correct one, especially if it's your chosen name. And never, ever, 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 ever that name a transgender person. We all know that we had a different name. The ones that knew us from before know that our name used to be different, but no, just don't. It only makes the situation really awkward. And yeah, sometimes a slip up, it happens. I'll laugh with you if you do it. I'll sometimes, hey, give you a quick nudge, like, dude, not cool. But if you do it intentionally, now I have heels, long nails, and a brick in my handbag. You choose your poison, please. But so some things specifically to touring, make sure that in a top-down situation, so be it management or the crew chief or tour manager, production manager, stage manager, empower your crew. Make sure they feel that they're in a safe environment where they can speak up, where they can address awkward situation, be it on their gender identity, on their race, on their religion, on their not being the tallest person in the room, not being the thinnest person in the room. Make sure that your crew feels safe in your care, because we're always as strong as the weakest link.
Yep.
Don't make that person know they're the weakest link, because they are actually going to make the whole machine break down. And if you notice that one of your colleagues who is in any of the marginalized groups is being abused, taken advantage of, or ridiculed, or abused, and any of the other things we don't want to happen, whether you agree with it or not, or understand being transgender, stand up for your colleague. Because if they are going to fall under the bus, that's the end of the tour, because the whole machine stops. That weakest link again, if we all make sure that weakest link is super strong, you have a good tour.
Yeah.
There is no other way around it. And yeah, the marginalized people are usually the ones that already have the fingers pointing at them and the targets on their back. But there's no need for it. Like, if I behave like an asshole, yeah, call me out on it. Make sure that I change my behavior or take a hike, but don't do it on something that I'm actually not in control over. Color, religion, provenance, identity.
Yeah.
You're not helping me. You're just breaking me, and with that, the tour. We don't need you, or at least in my case, I don't need you to mansplain to me. I've been around for a few years. I think I know my way around, because that's how I end up with one band for 10 years. Because I apparently seem to know well enough, or at least fake it well enough, to know what I'm doing. I don't need you to mansplain it to me.
Yeah.
Yes, I do actually sort of take it as a compliment, but that's just trying to make the best of a bad situation. But yeah, no one needs mansplaining. Not cisgender women,
No.
not transgender women, not non-binary people. We just don't need it. There is no space for it. There's no need for it. We're all hired for our skills, right?
Right.
We know what we're doing. If you're a tour manager, you're advancing. Make sure that you actually ask your crew, not just what's your emergency details, what's your frequent flyer numbers, what's your pronouns, what's your gender identity. You said, Carrie, that in the 80s or the 90s, you did share a room with the guys, also because you were just the only woman on the tour anyway. Budgets were what they were. But now that we know all of this, ask any person on tour, are you comfortable sharing with people of the same gender? Are you comfortable with sharing people with the other gender? Which bathroom would you use if they are standing or the sitting down versions? Make sure that you know these things of your crew, so you can help solve their issues, because before they become issues.
Yeah.
Don't just book, we'll put Jane and John in the same room because they're both backline.
Right.
Maybe John's a predator. Jane probably doesn't want to sleep with a predator in the same room. Yeah, and there was one very, very good thing that I heard Dana Wax say on the How to Be Better Ally episode. There were some bands that specifically hire marginalized people of course, for the short term, make sure they have a job, they don't bubble under. But for the long term, so they have a big name on the resume, so the resume can speak for them.
Right.
That's a very good thing. And of course, you don't need to just hire the transgender person because they're transgender. You hire them because they're good skills, because they've got good skills. But yeah, there is this thing that if you hire me, someone else will hire me, and I can then pay it forward by hiring someone else. We can pay it forward.
Right.
That's I think that's good. And yeah, obviously, most of the bands from the 80s aren't around anymore. So all the bad apples with all the sex, drug, and rock and roll attitudes all
Right.
sort of disappeared, or they moved on to the elderly homes. But there's newer bands as well that still live that life.
No.
But like I've had one of these bands where I said, like, yeah, thanks for the offer, but no, I want to be
Right.
available. But I would also want to make sure that other people in my situation know that band, you probably don't want to go there. That's
Right.
bad news. That's
Right.
not a good vibe. Or the we all know those tours where they have 5 monitor engineers on tour because
There's a reason.
yeah. We don't want to just say, hey, as a monitor engineer, you probably don't want to do that tour because of situations, but also how the crew actually gets treated on a personal level if you're going to be safe in that environment. There was one band that I worked for in 2012. I actually got fired. I was happy I got fired because it was one of those 80s bands where I was the only one not on drugs. And it was just not a good place to be.
Right.
And I got fired over something really silly, but I was happy that I was gone because I just couldn't deal with it. Despite being a soulless, empty, lightless robot, I still felt anxiety over the enormity of the abuse that happened on tour in every possible sense of the way. I think that's my list of how to be an ally.
Yeah, I think.
Did people take notes?
Yeah. Maybe I'll go back through this one and the how to be an ally webinars and maybe try to compile a list of things that people should actively be doing.
Having a document for this.
Document for
how to be an ally in general. Some specifics for specific groups.
Yeah.
It's going to be so useful.
I think one thing that if you are in a position of that tour manager or production manager, or even at the artist level or band manager level, or you own the sound company or the audio crew chief, everything starts at the top.
Yeah.
So these people, you need to make sure everyone on your tour is safe and know that they can come to you. And when you start the tour, these behaviors are not acceptable. So that everybody on your crew feels safe. And then stuff starts to change all the way down. And it just gives it's a way to clean up that toxic culture, and then something that I realized halfway through the ally webinars was, because we did one on sexual harassment last week, and sitting through a couple seminars on sexual harassment, they always make sure that the person that is being harassed will actually want you to stand up for them. Because sometimes they don't. Or sometimes they don't perceive it as a problem. Sometimes they're just keeping their head down. They don't want to draw attention.
Yeah.
You know, these are people being harassed, and should be their decision of how they're going to deal with it. So I always think I think it's important to, you know, before you make a huge announcement, standing up for someone, that maybe you check in with them first of like, are you okay? I don't agree with this. Do you want me to say something? Because they might be like, not even dealing with it today. Don't care. Don't make waves. I need this job, whatever it is, right? But definitely you should reach out to them and I want to support you. How can I do that? Right.
Now I remember you touching on this in the LI webinar, and there was also something important that Mike said about him speaking up and thinking that would be the end of his career. But instead, by showing that you've got a spine, that you've got a sense of civility and a sense of this is right, this is not right.
Right.
You actually improve your reputation because the next person about to hire you likes, Mike doesn't stand for that BS. We need Mike, instead of, oh, Mike's fine with that.
Right.
Go on. But that's counterintuitive, especially when you are about to be fired or firing yourself. You think, oh my God,
I'll never work again. But, you know, and character counts, you know, and I totally understand where Mike was coming from of like, I'm never going to work again, but I can't stay in this environment. And like he said, I was fine with like retiring. He was working on motorcycles, and then got the call. The industry has a short memory also. So you might feel like you're never going to work again. And then if we didn't have COVID, we'd be really busy right now. And people are like, call all these people. But they don't remember.
But Mike showed to be a person of integrity. So the phone kept ringing.
Integrity is super important, I think.
If I could answer Lisa's question real quick.
So I saw that one.
Okay. What happens if you don't identify anymore as a trans person? Instead, identify only with the gender you prefer. If I'm interpreting this correctly, there's no reason why you should disclose or that you should disclose what your gender identity is if you're not comfortable with that. And if you're working, you know, as a cisgender person or as a, you know, an ally, you know, myself as someone who is male passing and wants to be an ally to my femme and trans friends, if I'm aware that someone is transgender, I won't acknowledge it, and nor should you. If you're aware of that person's gender history or, you know, whatever identity that might marginalize them in a space, don't say anything. So for me, don't, you know, if I'm on set, don't refer to me as my birth name. Don't refer to me with she, her pronouns. You know, if we're talking in a past tense, don't refer to me as before Savvy was a man, or, you know, whatever you want to say that's already incorrect. You know, and for anyone else, if you say something like that, you're compromising someone's safety, first of all, and you're taking away the ability for them to disclose that information to someone else, which is, you know, something that is extremely important in a trans person's life. So again, if you're an ally, don't compromise someone's identity. Just in general, like, don't do that to not even trans people, or just anyone who doesn't want you spreading personal information about them. And again, if you don't identify as a trans person, if you only identify as a woman, if you only identify as a man, there's, like I said, no reason to disclose that if you're not comfortable, especially if it's a safety issue.
Indeed. And on the outing, sometimes transgender people get outed by third people. It's like, you don't say, hey, that person is gay, that person is Muslim, that person is conservative. You don't and shouldn't say that. And the same goes for transgender people. You don't, and it is maybe more than the others such a personal thing that you were assigned something else at birth than what you actually know to be true. If anyone, and a big if with letters this size, if anyone will be saying that, announcing that, it's got to be that person themselves,
Right.
no one else. And on the, if you don't identify anymore as trans, I've actually done that, well, let's call it experiment. In spring of 2019, my resume said transgender. I said, hey, I'm transgender. Oh, just so you know, I'm transgender. Couldn't get hired, couldn't get, I wouldn't be pissed on if I was on fire. Spring of 2020, early spring, last tour before we ran out of Corona beer, I actually said to myself, I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm transgender. I'm one of 4 crew on a 5-band bill. I knew 5 people from previous tours, 2 band members that for the main band that I had said hello to because they hung out in the bands backstage that I worked for, and one other band, they were one of the support bands on a bigger tour. One of the support band people was like, hey, I thought it was you. I was like, yeah, hi. Big smile. And that was okay. With the other people, I didn't come out as transgender. I just said, hey, I'm Laura. I'm a tall, curly babe. I'll be selling your merch on this tour. How may I be of service? A few of them in conversation, I told them, oh yeah, by the way, I used to be, or any kind of version of the story you want to tell. But more than half of the people never knew or never were told that I'm transgender. And for all intents and purposes, I am just Laura, a tall woman with a bit of a weird voice and large feet. And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I present as a woman. For all intents and purposes, I am a woman. If I look myself in the mirror, I see a woman. If you look at me, I hope you see a woman. So why refer to me as man, was a man, used to be a man, is actually a man, but, or any of those versions? It just doesn't apply, because this here, that's not a woman. That's not a man. That's a woman. So yeah, it's a great answer, and I think both Savy's and my answers, yeah, they highlight 2 different versions of what that question actually means. But it's a really good question. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. This was amazing, and I think it's super important that we keep having these conversations. I really thank both of you for sharing your stories. And I hope that we can keep having other discussions and reaching out and helping people and, keep making progress for all the marginalized groups in the industry. And you guys have any closing thoughts?
Thanks for having us, Carrie.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Absolutely. And I do hope that while we continue having these talks, at a certain point, we're going to realize we don't need to have these talks anymore.
And that's the goal.
Yeah.
That is the goal.
Absolutely. Like that. And just because I want to, and I can, and I think I should, I want to finish my words with a John Lewis quote. Wow. I just need to pull it up so I can do justice to it.
I'm excited.
And of course I can't find it.
I'd like to receive Scott's.
Yeah, I've got it. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect way to end this, guys. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. Thank you guys so much. It's so important. And
Thank you very much for inviting us, Carrie. But thank you very much for sharing the screen with you, Savy. I hope we get to non-COVID restricted
I know.
hugging or fist or elbow or
Hopefully sooner than later.
hugs at some point.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.